In 1944, America executed a child. His name was George Stinney Jr. He was just 14 years old, barely 90 pounds, and so small they had to sit him on a Bible to strap him into the electric chair. His trial lasted only 2 hours. His jury deliberated for just 10 minutes. And with no evidence, no defense, and no chance, the state killed him. This is not just a story about one boy. This is the story of how justice failed the most innocent among us. And his story still makes us ask, how could a justice system do this to a child? Before I dive into the main story, please hit that subscribe button, like, and share this video with your loved ones. I'd also love to know where you are watching from, so drop it in the comments. Thank you. Now, let's get into the story. Who he was. George Stinney Jr. was a black boy from a tiny mill town called Alcolu, South Carolina. Born in 1929, he was just 14 years old in the spring of 1944. On March 23, 1944, two young white girls went missing in Alcolu, Betty June Binnicker, just 11 years old, and Mary Emma Thames, only 7. They had been riding their bicycles looking for wildflowers. Later that day, their bodies were found in a ditch. Both had been beaten to death with a blunt object. The little town was in shock. Fear and anger swept through the community. People wanted answers. And very quickly, all eyes turned to George. The suspicion. George lived close to where the girls were last seen. Witnesses said the girls had spoken to him and his younger sister while asking about flowers. That was enough for the police. Soon, deputies took George into custody. They questioned him without his parents, without a lawyer, and without any protection for a child so young. Hours later, the police claimed he had confessed. But no written record was ever kept. No lawyer was present. No parent was allowed inside. It was his word against theirs, and in 1944 South Carolina, a black child's word meant nothing against white authority. Family driven away. The Stinney family paid a terrible price immediately. George's father lost his job at the mill. The family was forced to leave their company-owned home. After his arrest, his parents and siblings were threatened with lynching by white residents, and within days of the conviction, they had to leave town permanently. George was left alone, locked away, facing the most serious charge imaginable. The trial. The trial of George Stinney Jr. was nothing short of a tragedy. It lasted just 2 hours. His court-appointed lawyer, a white attorney named Charles Plowden, made no effort to defend him. He called no witnesses, presented no evidence, and didn't cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses. The jury was made up entirely of white men. They deliberated for just 10 minutes before returning with the verdict, guilty. 14-year-old George Stinney was sentenced to death. The execution. For weeks, George waited in prison. Then, on June 16, 1944, the state carried out the sentence in Columbia, South Carolina. Journalists at the time reported that George was so small, he had to sit on a book, some say a Bible, so he would fit in the electric chair built for grown men. When the hood was placed over his face, it slipped off because his head was too small. The image shocked those who saw it. At 7:30 p.m., the first of two 2,400-volt shocks surged through his body. Within minutes, the life of the youngest person executed in modern American history was over. He was just 14 years old. The aftermath. For decades, the case was spoken of in whispers. Many in South Carolina knew something about it was deeply wrong. No physical evidence had ever linked George to the crime. His so-called confession had been taken under duress. His trial had been rushed and unfair. His family carried the trauma for the rest of their lives. But the world kept moving, and George's name remained tied to the word murderer. Renewed interest. Decades later, historians, journalists, and lawyers began to dig back into the case. They searched for records, spoke to surviving witnesses, and studied what little documentation still existed. What they found painted a clear picture: George Stinney had been denied even the most basic rights. The injuries on Betty June and Mary Emma showed they had been struck with brutal force, far more than a small 90-pound boy could have delivered. Some accounts later pointed to a local white man with a history of violence who may have been responsible. And in 2014, George's sister Annie Stinney Ruffner came forward to testify that George had been with her on the day of the murders. But in 1944, no court ever heard her words. The 2014 decision. In 2014, 70 years after his death, a South Carolina judge reviewed the case. After studying the record, she declared the original trial fundamentally unfair. She wrote that George had suffered a violation of due process, the very foundation of justice. The conviction was vacated. In plain language, that means the law officially recognized his trial as invalid. The judge could not bring George back. She could not erase the decades of pain his family endured. But she could finally say, in the eyes of the law, that what happened to him was wrong. Yet, despite this ruling, George's family never received any formal apology or compensation from the state. Why it matters. The story of George Stinney Jr. is more than just a tale of one boy. It is a lesson about fear, prejudice, and injustice. It shows us how easily a system can fail when people rush to punish instead of search for truth. It shows us how vulnerable children are when no one stands to protect them. And it shows us the human cost of a justice system poisoned by racism.